Good evening. Tiffany Patterson, Executive Fellow leading the Vax Up ATL campaign with the City of Atlanta's Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. Thank you for joining us during this groundbreaking discussion on changing the narrative around health equity and racial justice. Tonight, our discussion will explore the power of Black representation and leadership in community, culture, science, public health, and policy. We are creating a space to address key concerns the Black community has voiced during the rollout of COVID-19 vaccines, and will turn to leaders in medicine and science who are changing systems from within, ensuring that going forward, institutions are structured to prosper us, not harm us, because they too themselves are us. It is true, we have shared experiences rooted in history that implicate our ability to trust healthcare, but we should never lose faith in each other. So, let's be open to discuss how we may prosper together. What we'll learn tonight is that vaccination puts us on the road to recovery. It does. However, we aren't simply looking to recover. We are looking to come out of this better than we came. We, you, and I, expect to thrive. This said, I'd like to take a moment to thank the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. OEDI is the arm of government in the city of Atlanta that ensures that historically marginalized communities, Black, Brown, immigrant, LGBTQ, low income, and youth are prioritized as we reimagine a more equitable city. Remember, follow ATL Equity for more information and learn more about the City of Atlanta's approach to prioritizing public health, the lens toward equity. And now, powering through the pandemic. Enjoy the discussion.
Thank you so much, Tiffany, for that wonderful introduction and really laying the groundwork of what to expect this evening. Hello, my name is Maria Moore, and I will be your moderator this evening. And we have put together a wonderful panel of political leaders, Black scientists, doctors, and influencers to engage with you in this discussion. That includes Dr. Jane Morgan, Dr. Thomas Oden, Dr. Aaron E Dodson, Ty Young, AJ Calloway, Isaac Hayes III, Senator Rafael Warnock, and of course, our host for the evening, Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms.
Thank you so much, Maria, and thank you to all of our panelists who've taken time out of their very busy schedules to join us this evening, and to everyone who's watching us. This is such an important conversation. And we have such distinguished guests with us this evening that I know that we are all in for a treat. We're going to all be well informed and educated about where our community stands with COVID-19. But I am especially thankful to be joined by our Senator Rafael Warnock, who is representing the state of Georgia and making the difference in this country. And he's not new to this. He's been doing it in our community in Atlanta for many years as the pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church, really walking the walk and speaking to our communities on those things that are impacting us. So thank you to all of our guests, and thank you especially Reverend Warnock, Senator Warnock, for taking time out of your schedule to be with us this evening.
Well, thank you so very much, Mayor Bottoms. Great to be with you.
Nice to see you twice in 1 week.
Absolutely.
Welcome, Senator Warnock, and we are so excited to have you here. And Mayor Bottoms brought up just very, very valid points about the work that you've been doing in our communities. And I think of two words, trust and track record. And you have a track record for actually doing the work. And my first question to you, Senator, is what steps are you taking on a national and local level as it relates to the pandemic?
Well, thank you so much. And again, it's great to be here with you. I'm grateful for the mayor and for her leadership and her courage in this space during the pandemic. It's been a tough 18 or 19 months, and she stood up in ways that are so important, and we're grateful for her leadership. We're in the midst of a once-in-a-century pandemic that's created an economic turndown, the likes of which we have not seen in our lifetime. And it requires all of us to dig in and to use the platforms that we have to take care of one another. And so I've tried to do that in my space, certainly as a United States Senator, but also as a pastor, as a dad, as a citizen. And first of all, I'm just really proud of the state of Georgia for doing what folks thought was not possible and sending me and my brother, as I call him, brother from another mother, Senator John Ossoff, to the United States Senate. And I'm saying that because elections matter, and we saw it in this election. If we had not won, we would not have been able to pass the American Rescue Plan. We would be having a very different discussion. But because we won and we gave the Senate the narrowest of the Democrats, the narrowest of majorities in the Senate, we were able to pass the American Rescue Plan, which strengthened our efforts to get all of our citizens vaccinated. We were literally able to put shots in arms and support and for families that are still digging their way out of this pandemic. We're able to support our local governments, our municipal governments. The mayor certainly can speak about that in the midst of this pandemic. When you think about issues around housing and shelter, so necessary to get a hold on the pandemic, all of that strengthened by the American Rescue Plan. In addition to that, I've tried to use my voice and my platform. Yeah. And so Ebenezer Church has been testing and vaccinating throughout this pandemic. And so we were very proud to host Vice President Kamala Harris a few months ago, and the mayor was there when we welcomed the Vice President when she came to our church in order to encourage more Georgians to get vaccinated. Our state could be doing better, far better with getting folks vaccinated. And then I was with the First Lady, Dr. Jill Biden, down in Savannah, Georgia, my hometown, encouraging people to get vaccinated. And so I keep pushing the message. For me, it's about love of neighbor. Love your neighbor enough to do the right thing. This pandemic has taught us that we are as close to each other in our humanity as a cough. Yeah. If my neighbor is sick, I'm potentially in peril. That doesn't make my neighbor my enemy. That means that her destiny and my destiny are inextricably linked. And so we have to look out for one another. And so wear a mask, love your neighbor, get vaccinated.
Yes, and we appreciate everything that you're doing, and we see the fruits of all of the work that you've done thus far and the things that are currently in progress. So thank you so much for that. Mayor Bottoms, when I think about you and your leadership, one word immediately comes to mind, and that's bold leadership, making tough decisions, always showing up for the city. Can you really drive home the point or help folks understand what vaccinations mean? Why is it so important that folks get out and get vaccinated?
Well, it's very tough to always follow Senator Warnock, but he said it best. It matters to our communities, and it's touching us in every single way. We talk a lot about people getting sick and people dying, which is absolutely devastating, but also just even the way that we are able to operate as a city. In Atlanta, there have been a lot of complaints lately because trash service has not been where it should be. Well, that is a direct impact of COVID on our day-to-day operation of the city. Our workers are only about 50%, a little above 50% vaccinated. So we have a lot of vaccine hesitancy in the city and in our workforce. We have people who are getting sick. They can't show up for work, and it means that we can't run the city as efficiently as we should. So even if you think it doesn't apply to you or it's not going to impact you, it's impacting everything about us. And thanks to the leadership of Senator Warnock and Senator Ossoff sending funding directly into our city, we were able just today to get legislation passed, and we're going to be able to provide additional pay, incentive pay to our sanitation workers because they work throughout the pandemic. 70% of our workforce is considered frontline, and they are continuing to work. So what we are asking people is to please trust us on this. I have this conversation quite a bit with my 19-year-old who thankfully is vaccinated, but he reads a lot of social media, gets a lot of misinformation, and he's, very openly told me that he's not going to get the booster shot based on what he's seen on social media. And so that's why this influencer campaign is so important, because this is not just some right-wing conspiracy that's making people hesitant to get vaccines. It's happening in the African-American community. And I'll just say, I've been blown away, quite frankly, by people who are hesitant. I have family members who still haven't gotten the first vaccine shot, which is shocking to me. It is astonishing to me. But the more we speak about it and the more we share our stories of how we've gotten vaccinated and we're okay and we are better because of it, I think that the more people in our communities will be willing to take a chance and get vaccinated. And I can tell you, having faced COVID in our household last summer, thankfully, my son and I were pretty much asymptomatic. But watching what my husband went through, I wouldn't wish that on anyone. And anyone who is vaccine hesitant has likely not been close to someone who's had a bad bout with COVID.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, like I said, I've seen you out working tirelessly, working for the people of Atlanta. And I think the big word that you used there was trust, and to look at all of the things that you've done for our community and the leadership. And we really appreciate that because it is important. You talked about equitable recovery, and you mentioned, Mayor Bottoms, about the legislation related to the sanitation workers and getting those extra funds. Senator Warnock, I wanted to ask you, what legislation are you working on, or what may already be in place as it relates to equitable recovery?
Well, one of the things that this pandemic did was it brought into sharp focus long-standing inequities, economic disparity, which leads to health care disparities, as you talk about, the social determinants of health, as the public health experts call it. But what is it about your environment, the day-to-day struggles that you have that contribute to your ability to thrive or not? And we've seen these disparities for a long time. And so COVID hit everybody. But as we often say in our community, when America has the flu, Black America has pneumonia.
Yeah.
And so with Black folk and people of color being disproportionately represented among essential workers, so they're likely to be at risk, with the longstanding issues around chronic disease in our community, driven by a whole range of systemic issues, hypertension, diabetes, food deserts, all of these things were made worse by the pandemic. So one of the things that I'm focused on is expanding Medicaid in the state of Georgia. Georgia is one of 12 states where the state leaders, not the people, the folks in the legislature, keep digging in their heels, fighting a battle, a political battle of more than a decade ago. Since 2010, the Affordable Care Act has been the law of the land. Georgia keeps refusing to expand Medicaid. And as a result of that, in our rural areas, we've had 10 hospitals to close in a decade.
Mm.
And we have 640,000 Georgians in the Medicaid gap. Who are we talking about? We're talking about people who aren't poor enough to get Medicaid, conventional Medicaid. But they can't really afford private insurance either. They're in the gap. These are working people, largely. These are the working poor. Georgia keeps refusing to expand Medicaid. I put extra money in the American Rescue Plan to incentivize Georgia even more to expand. They won't do it. And it's just a political game that politicians are playing, using the people as hostages. So in this upcoming reconciliation package or Build Back Better package, I have a bill called the Medicaid Saves Lives Act. It will direct CMS to set up a lookalike Medicaid program that's administered directly by CMS, so that the people of Georgia are not held hostage by the politics of cynical politicians. It means that people will have access to care. It'll help with this pandemic and the struggles to come as people have access to equitable healthcare.
And I think that's so important, especially, like you said, for the working poor. Thank you so much for that. Mayor Bottoms, can you talk a little bit about what you're doing here in Atlanta, the initiative that you have in place as it relates to the pandemic and equitable recovery?
And Senator Warnock has touched on that. Because of the American Rescue Funds, we've been able to stand in the gap for so many of our communities. I mentioned the pay to our sanitation workers. We were able to give our workers hazard pay. We've been able to offer millions upon millions of dollars in rental assistance and mortgage assistance. Also, being able to help small businesses has been a tremendous need. And we've been able to do that with American Rescue Funds. And there, for everything that I've mentioned, there are probably 20 other things that we've been able to do. And also address the budget shortfalls in our city because of the economic impact of the pandemic. These funds allowed us to help put food on the table of our families during the pandemic and really meet our communities at their point of need. So I am so grateful for Senator Warnock, his leadership, and just this reminder that elections absolutely matter. Because if Atlanta didn't have the assistance that we have received from the American Rescue Funds and the ability to impact our communities directly, it just gives me a knot in my stomach to think of the state that our city would be in right now.
Wow. Well, we're very grateful for both of your leadership and how you have come together to help both the state and the city locally. Senator Warnock, I know that you're pretty tight on time, and we wanted to give you an opportunity to make any closing statements.
Well, I just want to thank the mayor for this conversation tonight. It's good to have a chance to lift up this issue. And I want to say to the folks who are tuning in, if you haven't gotten vaccinated, please get vaccinated. I've gotten vaccinated, the mayor's gotten vaccinated, and we're just fine. Don't be afraid of the vaccine, be afraid of the virus. And get that message out to everybody you love and you care about, and know that I'm in the U.S. Senate doing everything I can to make sure that people have access to health care. Finally, I want to thank our healthcare workers, because they have been heroes in the midst of this, literally risking their lives to take care of us. And I think we do them a grave injustice when we refuse to get vaccinated, because our healthcare systems are now being strained for lack of beds for COVID folks, which impacts people who have other issues. Our emergency rooms are being stretched to capacity, and much of this is not necessary. And so let's pull in together and let's make it happen. The only way we get through this pandemic is we got to walk together. So thanks everybody for being here. Keep the faith.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Senator Warnock. And so now we want to go ahead and transition into our panel discussion. And I would like to first introduce our doctors. Dr. Jane Morgan, she is here. And Dr. Morgan, I want to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself and tell us what you've been doing in terms of the response to COVID and the pandemic.
Hi, Mayor Bottoms. Hi, Maria. Thank you guys for having me this evening. I'm really excited to be here. My name is Dr. Jane Morgan. I am a cardiologist actually by training. I currently lead the COVID task force for Piedmont Healthcare, which is the largest healthcare system here in the state of Georgia. And if you can imagine, when we first began this pandemic, I was leading, I like to say I was kind of minding my own business. I was leading research and innovation for Piedmont. And I was redeployed to lead the COVID task force for what was supposed to be a temporary move. No worries, Dr. Morgan. We just need someone for 60 to 120 days. We're going to shelter in place. Here we are, a year and a half later, right? I never got back to research and innovation. We are here in our fourth surge, which is the first surge that we have had that has been entirely preventable because vaccines have been available and accessible. And so I'm looking forward to a very robust discussion about, how we got here, the window of opportunities that we have missed, and what is ahead for us, and how can we get there together?
Yes, we're looking forward to that conversation. And I know that was Mayor Bottom's main objective, to have Black medical professionals come and give us the actual medical background. So thank you so much for that. Next up, we have Dr. Thomas Oden. Welcome. I would like to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself and tell us what work you've been doing related to the COVID pandemic.
Sure. Good evening, Mayor Bottoms and Maria. Thanks for having me. Hi, Dr. Morgan. My name is Dr. Thomas Oden. I'm an adult forensic psychiatrist, and have a private practice in Atlanta, but I'm also licensed in multiple states. And so I partnered with many online platforms like Teladoc, Virtual Medical Staffing, American Well. And so I was doing that right before the pandemic. But then once the pandemic began, beginning in 2020, many people started to access these platforms and it blew up. And so I saw many people for the first time having mental health crises, a lot of anxiety, depression, the isolation of the quarantine and the lockdowns taking place, being furloughed. And so regardless of your background, way of life, saw many people dealing with the same thing and saw just a very huge mental health crisis taking place. And just provided a lot of therapy as well as medication management. And over time, I began to see that many people were having somewhat of an existential crisis. Their vitality and their mortality were finally being confronted as a result of the virus. And many people don't think about that often. And so I saw that, had to really treat it. And then over time, I began to see the vaccine hesitancy take place nationally and different groups of people who had their concerns and started hosting IG Live discussions about vaccine hesitancy, trying to understand the psychology of the fear, how that was leading to going into the echo chambers of social media that would confirm your bias. And so a lot of work in the mental health capacity, also engaging with communities. My forensic arm of training, I'm always curious about why people are hesitant, about the misconceptions, the different theories about that, and understanding, okay, what's the psyche here so that we can actually combat that. Because having knowledge is one thing, but actually being able to understand where someone's coming from, hear them, and find that middle ground is very important. And we're seeing that. I mean, many doctors are vaccinated at this point. 96% of us are vaccinated, but only 5% of us are physicians. Well, only 5% of Black doctors are in the United States. And as a result of that, we really have to engage the public. We need to be mindful of that and meet people where they're at and also help them understand the importance of being vaccinated.
Yes. Well, we thank you for that. I follow you on social media, at a very insightful live the other day. So I'm looking forward to your contribution to this evening's discussion. Next up, we have Dr. Aaron E. Dodson. Welcome.
Hello. Thank you. Good evening. Good evening, Mayor Bottoms, Maria. Pleasure. Dr. Morgan, good to see you again.
Nice to
and
see
hello,
you.
Dr. Oden. A pleasure. My name is Dr. Aaron Dodson. I work for the FDA. I work in their division of food safety and applied nutrition. I work in a division, I'm the lead contact person on our COVID task force. And so what I am responsible for doing is reviewing dietary supplements that are making claims to either treat, prevent, or mitigate COVID-19. So we evaluate those claims and we have discussions with firms and have them pull those products off the market. Because there's a lot of hesitancy as it regards to COVID vaccine, a lot of consumers are looking for alternatives to treat COVID or prevent COVID. So we have been in flux with a lot of dietary supplements on the market that are said to treat, mitigate, or prevent COVID-19. And our responsibility on my team is to evaluate those claims.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
Next up, we have three incredible influencers. First up, Isaac Hayes III, producer, voice actor, activist, social media network mogul. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Isaac, we have AJ Calloway, renowned entertainment reporter and entrepreneur, is here this evening. And we have Ty Young, pro athlete, retired WNBA star and entrepreneur. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. So I want to go ahead and jump right into the discussion. First, addressing you, Mayor Bottoms. If enough people get vaccinated, people that aren't vaccinated are trying to understand why they still need to get vaccinated. We've heard a lot about this concept of herd immunity, and if enough people get vaccinated, why do I still need to get vaccinated? What do you have to say to that?
Well, I feel like I should defer to one of our many medical professionals, but I'll take a stab at it. Just based on what I've been told, it's a lot more complicated than that. We can't wait on everyone else to get vaccinated in order for us to achieve herd immunity. This will only happen with each of us getting vaccinated and protecting ourselves and protecting each and every person that we come in contact with. But I know one of our medical professionals can probably speak more eloquently to that question.
Dr. Morgan?
Mayor Bottoms is absolutely right, and she, very eloquently stated it. Something that we have to think about is the language that's being used by newscasters and by lay people. Originally, at the beginning of this pandemic, we're talking about mutations. We now talk about variants, right? When did that language change? That is not an innocuous word. That word is very specific and denotes an escalation in the pandemic to the scientific community. What is the difference? The difference is a variant is comprised of several mutations that have all clustered together to form a new version of the original virus. This Delta variant is not the same version of our original virus. So think about that. So when we talk about the unvaccinated, this is where the variants develop, in the unvaccinated. And so that's why they pose a threat to others, because at some point we could have a variant that could challenge or overcome our vaccine status. And then we all have to start all over again. And at this time, we wouldn't start over at ground zero. We would be in negative numbers, because at this point, the vaccine companies would be forced to go back and not provide boosters, but to develop a reformulation of their vaccine to address all of the variants that have evolved since the clinical trials closed. So that's why it's important for everyone to be vaccinated, and why we really don't want community immunity, meaning we have pockets of people who are immune and pockets who are not, because the pockets who are not is where the variants begin to develop and these mutations. And then we are an interdependent society. At some point, we'll mix in, and if people who are unvaccinated bring their variants with them, and here we start all over again. We can never get off this merry-go-round.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for that detailed response to that question. And for those of you who are watching on Facebook Live, I want to invite you to put any questions that you may have in the chat, because we'll be getting to those a little bit later. AJ, I know that you're a father, and you have a question for one of the doctors specifically related to that.
So I'm a father of three. I have three little ones, 8, 7, and 4. And I know that, they're talking about the vaccines will be open for children pretty soon. Just your thoughts on getting the vaccine for your children. How safe is it? I know that they were talking about it. I think by the end of October, they said it might be available. Just any thoughts on that? And then also, I know other people wanted to know if they got vaccinated, are you still able to contract COVID-19 after being vaccinated? Kind of two-part question. So Dr. Morgan or Dr. Dodson, any of the...
I'll start with, I guess, one part of the question. If you are vaccinated, you can still contract COVID, and the Delta variant certainly has changed the game somewhat. So with the previous variants, you remember that Dr. Walensky, the director of the CDC, came out and said, everybody who's fully immunized can now remove their mask, either indoors or outdoors, because not only are you protected from the COVID-19 disease, the SARS-CoV-2 virus, but you are highly unlikely transmitted to others because the viral load inside of you will be so low. Your vaccines are protecting you. Well, now we have this Delta variant, and we saw her come out to say, hey, everybody, please put back on your mask. The reason for that is that this particular variant carries a viral load that's 1,200 times higher than the previous variants. This is a game changer. Because of that, because of all of those viral particles, even though you by and large are protected from getting sick, hospitalized, or death, you now have the opportunity to spread it to others because you have so many viral particles. So we have to go back into wearing that mask. We also then began to see what is termed as these breakthrough infections. That's from the Delta variant. So people who are immunized, remember, these vaccines are not 100%. They're pretty good. They're not 100% though. And so there's going to be some small percentage of people who still will be infected. We also know from the Pfizer FDA briefing a week and a half ago, 7 hours of it, I sat through the entire thing, is that the vaccines are waning in their effectiveness over time. At 6 months, We now see Pfizer has dropped from 95% to 91%. So again, we can expect breakthrough infections in people who are furthest from their second dose. And also because we're having increasingly virulent variants, meaning new versions of the virus continuing to be and circulate in our society.
Yes, thank you so much for that. Isaac, I know you had a question for Dr. Oden, and you've been very passionate about your views on vaccination. Follow you on social media, and sometimes those comments can get pretty passionate there. Did you have a question that you wanted to ask one of the doctors?
Yeah, actually, a large portion of Black and brown people are very hesitant to get vaccinated because of historical issues, things like the Tuskegee experiment. And a lot of times the Black communities mistrust at times of the government and medicine for those reasons. How can they trust, how can we trust medicine now?
And I'll answer that. So I understand the hesitancy based on our lack of trust, based on what happened to us as a people. It's very well recorded that we've been experimented on. We have to understand that a lot of safeguards have been put in place because of those things happening, because Tuskegee happening. Our community has always taken the blunt of injustices and inequities. And so what benefits many other groups of people is that they have more representation of physicians. There's not a lot of Black physicians. And so because of that, many of us don't really understand or have the comfort of being able to talk to our doctors and let them know our concerns. But at this point in time, we have very good data. The scientific advancements right now are actually something we haven't had in such a long time. I mean, the mRNA vaccines wouldn't have been able to be made 5 years ago. And so the data collection regarding the current research is like unprecedented. The amount of information that's being shared among scientists around the world is unprecedented. You have data, you don't even trust the US government, you know, as a Black person. You can look up any other country, they're dealing with COVID. This is a global pandemic. And so you can just research COVID, any other country name, and you'll see that every country is handling this. Every country is giving out the vaccinations. You've been 300 million doses of vaccine given around in the United States. 6 billion doses have been given around the world of the vaccines. We know how safe it is. And so even if you don't trust our government for various different reasons based on historical context, you have to understand that there's data being collected from all over that's showing that the vaccines work, that they're safe, that this virus is a real thing. And, you know, we just have to really keep that in mind. But history is important. We have to discuss that. We can't ignore that. We don't want history to repeat itself as well. Because Tuskegee happened because we weren't being treated with a life-saving medication, right? Penicillin was helping to treat syphilis, but then they were not treated for it, and they wanted to see the long-term complications of that. And so when we talk about Tuskegee experiment and talk about the experimentation that's happened on our people, just know that was actually a disease of us not being treated. And right now, COVID has become the disease of the unvaccinated. And we are suffering as a result of that. And we have to keep that in mind, that there is treatment available or protective measures available due to vaccines. And so, you know, that comparison sometimes can be very nuanced. I understand where it comes from, but we actually have treatment available now, and we're not accessing it fully.
And Maria, before we go to the next question, I know AJ had a two-part question, one being on the vaccines for children. Can someone speak to that, please?
Yeah, I can speak to that one as well. I mean, we know that's a very big issue. The data that's going to be researched and collected from that before the FDA makes their decision is going to be heavily scrutinized. It's such a big deal. Right now, you know, initially before the Delta variant, I personally wasn't super pressed to vaccinate children. But now with the Delta variant, children are dying. They're dying, they're being hospitalized, they're getting long-haul COVID symptoms. So even after the infection is cleared, they have long-term symptoms. So they're having seizures, they're getting hallucinations, anxiety, depression, chronic pain symptoms, chronic fatigue. And so that's a pretty big deal. You know, we know that children, it's very important for them from a developmental level to be in school, to have certain social contact with other students. And so when they're getting sick or missing classes, that really affects them psychologically as well. And so that data still needs to be approved by the FDA. But once we see Pfizer's results, it's going to be heavily scrutinized by many different scientists, physicians, because we need to make sure that our children are safe. So far, we see that even when it comes to the rare side effects that some people can have that can be quite severe, although they can resolve fairly quickly as well, younger people do better with that. And so far we're seeing that younger folks tolerate the vaccines a lot better. When they get certain side effects, it resolves a lot better as well. And so there's a lot of evidence showing that vaccinated children will be okay, but we need to see the data and we need to make sure that it's safe. But there's a lot of arguments to support children being vaccinated because now they're being very injured.
Yeah, and I just want to kind of piggyback on that, Mayor Bottoms, maybe for Dr. Morgan or Dr. Dodson to hop in on this, because I'm a mother as well. Can you talk a little bit about unvaccinated adults being around children and the risk associated with that? And also, as another part, what can we do as parents? We know washing hands and masking up, but can you kind of reiterate or provide us with more insight on how we can protect our children until a vaccine is ready?
Well, it's very important. I think that parents should make a sound decision and get vaccinated because, again, as Dr. Oden stated, our children are being affected, especially with this Delta variant being out. So parents should vaccinate themselves to protect their children. And also, if the parent decides not to vaccinate themselves, they should certainly wear a mask indoors and outdoors and encourage their child to do the same. Because as we know, pediatric care in hospitals are rising daily. And so kids are, in fact, being infected by this particular virus.
Thank you. Thank you. Ty, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. You had a question for Dr. Dodson as well.
Yes, thank you for having me. Dr. Dodson, who exactly should get the booster shot now and why?
Hello, Ty. Pleasure to see you. That's really a good question. So it is recommended that any persons 65 older in years and plus should receive the booster shot. And also for those individuals that may be in long-term care facilities. But I would like to make mention that the risk of illness of COVID-19, it increases with age of any adult. And it is advised that those persons with underlying health issues should receive the booster shot. Now, there are three categories of this question that I would like to answer. The first one I talked about, the 65 and older adults that are maybe in extended long care facilities, but there also are those 18 and over. These are individuals who have underlying health issues, i.e. Heart condition, hypertension, diabetes, cystic fibrosis, cancer, HIV. Those persons with underlying health issues should certainly receive the booster. Also, there's another group that I would like to bring to your attention, 18 and older, and those individuals that are working in high-risk areas in terms of their employment. Those individuals will be first responders, police officers, healthcare workers, correctional officers, food and sanitation workers, firefighters. Those are individuals who should also receive the booster shot.
Thank you, Dr. Dodson. AJ, he has a question for Dr. Oden.
Hey, Dr. Oden, how you doing?
Hi.
Everybody's so tense. All right, what are you finding is the psychology behind some individuals that do not want to wear masks or get vaccinated? Like, what do you, what's the psychology behind it? I had a conversation with somebody today who, they were adamant on not getting vaccinated, and there was no amount of facts that would change them. What's the psychology behind that?
Right. So what I've seen often is that many people just find this pandemic very confronting. Pandemics change society. That's happened throughout history. And so many people are afraid to leave their homes. They were afraid of the lockdowns, afraid of getting a virus that we can't see with the naked eye. And so because of that, many people had this somewhat existential crisis taking place. And I think some people felt very called to take care of themselves and to work on their diet and get physically active. And some people just found it confronting that their life would be in danger from some type of pandemic and decided instead to just be in denial. And so you have a lot of people who don't want to get any vaccine and they don't want to wear masks. And so I feel like the psychology of that has a lot to do with just denial. They want to minimize things because the thought of their mortality is too confronting for them to face. We have social media, which we're still trying to understand the psychological effects of social media over time. It's clearly doing something to many people's brains. You have echo chambers that can also support your concerns and fears. And so some people have decided to go into different conspiracy theories because they feel that things are uncertain around them. Well, the underlying issue is that there's uncertainties, there's a lot of fears, the economy is kind of shifting in different ways. And when you don't understand what's happening around you, you want to control as much as you can. And so most people want to control what's in their immediate vicinity of control, which is, their bodies. Some people are getting substance use issues as a result of that. Some people are having domestic violence issues rising as a result of that. We saw that a lot in the pandemic. And so when you feel like things around you are changing, you don't necessarily know how to handle that. Wearing a mask just feels like someone's controlling your freedoms, being told what to do, where you can't go because you're not vaccinated seems to be impingement on your freedoms. And then when you're also in that state of fear and vulnerability, you're easily influenced. And there's many people who profit from that influence. And so we're seeing people profit from the pandemic, profit from the disinformation and misinformation. And many people that are vulnerable towards that are being subjected to that as well. And so it's very complex. There's not one reason. I know many people that are vaccine hesitant that are actually, they want to be very vigilant about wearing masks and sanitation efforts. And then you see some people who are not. So it's hard to group them all together. Social media is definitely playing a part of it. I think our internal discomforts of what's taking place is a part of it. Our fears and concerns about getting the virus is part of it. But again, why 96% of doctors were vaccinated before even any type of hospital mandates took place, because we were more afraid of the virus than the vaccine. And so I always try to encourage many people to not just read the things that support your fears, read alternative information that can also be in contradiction to that as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Mayor Bottoms, I have like a two-part question for you. First, I want you to kind of go into a little bit further detail about equitable recovery and what does it mean. And I would also like to hear from all of the panelists. Some people who are not vaccinated, they're not anti-vaxxers, but they have a lot of anxiety about actually getting the vaccine. So if each of you just could kind of jog through your mind, like what would be like a checklist that you would personally, advice you would give in terms of easing someone's anxiety, or maybe something that worked for you if you were anxious to take the vaccine? Because Mayor Bottoms, I'm sure you've heard about people who are nervous about taking it. So equitable recovery, and then if you could lead the conversation about addressing those anxious feelings.
Yeah, sure, Maria. So I touched on this a little bit in as we talked with Senator Warnock. It's just making sure that we have even the playing field to allow our communities to get back on their feet, because the reality is many in our communities only live paycheck to paycheck, barely making it to the next paycheck quite often. So immediately in the city of Atlanta, I just went through the mental checklist of what could we possibly do to make this time a little easier in the life of our city. And along with our very talented and thoughtful and community-oriented team, we came up with a number of immediate actions. So, for example, we suspended parking fines. We suspended water payments. We delayed payments for business licenses for small businesses, and also $500 a month for our frontline employees. That included our sanitation workers, our public safety officials, anybody who was going out working every day in the course of the pandemic, while many of us had the ability to go into our homes and not have to deal with the public. We made sure that they were getting additional pay. We also did we provided support to 815 small businesses. 6,000 families have received housing assistance. Also, we committed money to those experiencing homelessness. We opened up a hotel in the midst of the pandemic to house our homeless population. Unfortunately, that hotel has now been sold, so that housing is no longer available to us. Also, we repurposed many of our city departments and really turned them into relief departments. So our parks and recreations employees immediately began delivering meals to children who were not getting their free lunch and their free breakfast at school, because for a lot of kids, in our communities. That's the only meal that they get. Also, we began delivering meals to our seniors, delivering 119,000 meals over the course of the pandemic. So I was very proud of what we were able to do on behalf of the city of Atlanta. And that's what equity is all about, just making sure that people have what they need in their time of need, and making sure that we're standing in the gap as people work and businesses work to get to the other side of this pandemic. And, to your second question about the conversations, I can't use the colorful language I use with my son when he stands in my kitchen and tells me why he's not going to get the shot. Um, but I just try and have very real conversations, and part of that conversation, even with my son, was, when was the last time that you followed a vaccine study? You've been vaccinated your entire life, and I'm sure you can't tell me any of the studies or any of the information on what you're seeing on social media on any of the other 15 vaccines that you have received over the course of your lifetime. So why are you so skeptical with this? Now, that's a personal conversation I can have with my son, who's in college and just likes to challenge me. But in terms of that public conversation, it's trust the science, trust the healthcare professionals. We are, I believe, making very selfish decisions when we don't get vaccinated, because we're looking at our frontline health workers saying that they are exhausted and that this is taxing on them emotionally and physically and mentally. And I think that there are times when we just have to be unselfish about our decisions for the greater good. And it's my hope that we will continue to do that as a community.
Yes. I love that we get the mayor and we get the mama when you go into mama mode. Really love that. Isaac, can you chime in on that? Did you have any anxieties, or do you have any close friends or loved ones who may have been dealing with anxiety about getting the vaccine? What advice would you give?
Yeah, I mean, initially, I'm always going to just do research, and I understand that I've been vaccinated throughout my life. So I understood that, and seeing the effect that COVID has had on our community and nationwide, you just have to make the decision that, do you want to get the vaccine or do you want to get COVID? And I've seen a lot of people get really critically ill from COVID, have, long hauler symptoms, asthma, damage to their lungs, all types of stuff like that. And so my hesitation was quickly, resolved in seeing some of my friends suffer and call and tell me, look, you don't want to get this. Get the vaccine when it comes out, because I'm going to get the vaccine because I don't want to catch this again. And then I think secondly, after having the information and explaining to people from time to time that ask me about the vaccine, I'm like, well, we get vaccinated all the time. I have plenty of friends that travel, have to get vaccinated to go to different countries. When you get a tetanus shot, that is a vaccine, a tetanus vaccine. So we're getting vaccinated in many different ways. A lot of people get the flu shot annually. So I just try to let people understand that, not to listen to the misinformation that I think has taken over social media. I think it has drowned out a lot of the really good information about vaccines, and really good information about, defending yourself against COVID. So I know people say they do their research, but I think listening to doctors, and I've had several conversations with doctors, and I tell my friends who are hesitant, talk to your doctors, talk to the people that treat you and understand your health the best, figure out what decision is best for you, and most likely they will tell you you need to get this vaccine.
Thank you so much for that. And let's talk about a myth. Well, debunk, is it a myth or is it fact? Dr. Morgan, there's been a lot of conversation about infertility, sterilization, specifically related to getting the COVID-19 vaccine. Can you speak to that? Have there been any reports on that, reliable, substantial reports on any of that happening as an adverse effect related to the COVID-19 vaccines?
Thank you for that question, Maria. You know, when we look at the Moderna vaccine, the Moderna trials, 30,000 people were enrolled in those trials. We looked at Pfizer, over 40,000 people were enrolled in those trials. The Johnson Johnson trial, over 42,000. So that's about 112,000 people were enrolled in those trials. Pregnant women were excluded. They were not allowed in the trial. And not only were pregnant women excluded, women, once they were enrolled in the trial, had to take a pregnancy test to have objective data that they were not pregnant. And then they had to sign an attestation stating they would not get pregnant during the course of the trials. But this is, you know, America. What do you think happened? Right? In the Moderna trial, 23 women ended up getting pregnant. In the Pfizer trial, 13 women ended up getting pregnant. In the Johnson & Johnson trial, 8 women ended up getting pregnant. We call these unintended pregnancies, not because the women didn't intend for them to happen, but the companies did not intend for them to happen. But what that gave us is this nice little cohort of 44 women now, all of whom were pregnant, all of whom had gotten pregnant after receiving the vaccine. And we can now follow these babies, this gestation, and the mothers. And what has happened is all 44 of those babies have been born. Gestations were normal, meaning the pregnancy term. The babies were delivered. They are doing well. The mothers are doing well. We had one incident of a spontaneous abortion. And when we unblinded that patient, blinding is a very specific scientific term. And generally, at a high level, when you're in a clinical trial, half the people are getting the real vaccine and the other half are getting the dummy vaccine. And nobody knows which is which. That's called blinding. And so when we unblind that patient, it's like breaking the code, tearing opening the envelope at the Oscars and announcing the winner. It was determined that spontaneous abortion was in the placebo arm, was in the group that had never received the vaccine. So what else do we know about pregnancy and fertility? We know that when you get your vaccine, you download this BeSafe app. And you can put anything you want in that BeSafe app that you think is related to the vaccine. As of the end of August, we had over 150,000 pregnant women register with that BeSafe app. Let's just think about that number for a minute, because pregnant women were excluded from these large phase 3 trials that combined were around 112,000. Now pregnant women outnumber all of the trials put together. And so when we look at the first 30,000 of these women, this ACIP committee for the CDC, it turns out that their incidences of intrauterine growth retardation, pregnancy-induced hypertension, preeclampsia, eclampsia, spontaneous abortion turned out to be less in that group of immunized women than in the general population of pregnant women who had not been immunized. That is why we hear the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Society of Reproductive Medicine, the American Society of Maternal Fetal Medicine, all come out to say, not only do we recommend this vaccine for pregnant women, we also recommend this vaccine for women desiring to be pregnant. Today, we heard the CDC come out to say, we want to have a push for all pregnant women to receive this vaccine. We do not have data that shows any deleterious effects to mom or baby. And in fact, the opposite. If you were to be infected with this virus, which is what the CDC was noting in its data, we're having increasing deaths of pregnant mothers. What a tragedy. The fetus and the mothers are dying once they are infected with this COVID virus. The risk-benefit ratio just doesn't bear out. So we want to encourage everybody to get their vaccines.
Yes, you gave a very thorough explanation. I wish I had a Dr. Morgan button I can just press when people ask questions. So, Ty, I wanted you to go ahead and ask the last question to Dr. Dodson. And before you do that, I want to remind everyone who's watching the live stream, you can go ahead and post your questions in the chat. And we'll begin that discussion with our public audience, all of our viewers tuning into the live stream. Ty?
Dr. Dodson, some say they are still waiting to see if there are long-term adverse effects from the vaccines. How long after getting vaccinated should one expect to experience any side effects?
Hey, Ty, great question again. So, you know, the adverse reactions are the reactions to a vaccine. It may vary, but generally 1 to 2 days after receiving your vaccination, your shot, there are persons that are experiencing symptoms. Some symptoms such as, tenderness or pain in the injection site, swelling, tiredness, fatigue, headaches, nausea, chills, weakness. Those are all common symptoms that are being seen post vaccine. Now, you can do several things to help mitigate those adverse reactions. But I would say first, if you are considering taking any OTC drugs, over-the-counter drugs, I would recommend that you first consult with your primary care physician for some drugs like ibuprofen, any antihistamine, aspirin. I suggest that you strongly consult with your physician prior to doing that. But there are some things that you could do to protect yourself or ease the discomfort. Applying a cool towel or washcloth to your arm, to the area. Also exercising that arm. That can also help to relieve some of the stiffness, the pain and discomfort. So it's not uncommon to feel some sort of pain or discomfort in that injection site area and or experiencing some flu-like symptoms, but those generally last 24 to 48 hours, and it may vary with some people. I would also like to add that if you find that in that area there's continued redness and swelling, you may want to consult your doctor if you have went past that 24 to 48 hour window, and or if you feel like your symptoms are worsening. Those are all symptoms that you should consult with your physician on if they are persistent.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Dodson. And Mayor Bottoms, I believe we're ready to begin our conversation with the public. And you had a few things that you wanted to say before we hop into that.
Well, I just want to thank everybody who, again, is taking their time out, our panelists who took time out of their evenings to join us today. This is such an important conversation, so important for our community to hear it directly from the experts, the people who live in our communities, who understand our communities, and certainly have a heart and want the best for our communities. So thank you again on behalf of Atlanta, on behalf of our One Atlanta team, and our entire city. This is a very much needed conversation. I'm grateful that you all have participated and shared so much helpful information with us.
Thank you so much, Mayor Bottoms. We appreciate you for hosting this event and putting everything together. And now we want to start our discussion with the public. And again, you can go ahead and drop your questions in the chat. If you have any questions for any of our doctors or any of our influencers on the panel here today, I do want to start with a question for the doctors, and any of you feel free to jump in to answer this question. There have been a lot of conversations about natural immunity and not needing the vaccine because I already had COVID and I recovered and I have antibodies. Can you all give us some insight on that? Because I know
yes, I will start off, and I would ask that Dr.
You would read.
I will start off, and I ask Dr. Morgan or Dr. Odom to please piggyback my response. I think there has been many people say, well, I've already had COVID and I have antibodies, so I don't need to get the vaccine. Well, that's not true. So one of the things that we don't know is how much of the antibodies your body has built as a result of contracting COVID. And so that's why it's important that you still should get the vaccine, even if it's just that first vaccine, that first shot, that still gives you some level of protection. So there's still work to be done and to learn about the antibodies that build up as a result of contracting COVID. But it doesn't protect you like the vaccine would, because we don't know how much of those antibodies are being are generated in your system. Dr. Morgan.
I'll follow up thank you, Dr. Dodson. I'll follow on. One of the things that concerns us is that we know you have a great level of protection for the first 30 days. After 30 days, it becomes variable. It's inconsistent. So some people who've been infected, their immunity will drop slightly, but they will have fairly good immunity, up at about 80 or 81%, pretty level. but other people will drop off precipitously, and we're not able to tell who's who, and we're not able to predict it. Inconsistent immunity leads to pockets of infection, pockets of mutations and variants. Even those who maintain an immunity at 81%, we have vaccines that can get you up to 90 something percent. And so we know with the Pfizer data that was submitted to the FDA that immunity wanes over time and will drop to 91% in the Pfizer cohort, in the Pfizer people who've gotten the vaccine. The other thing that we can look at is this Israeli study that's been much touted in the news that said, people who were vaccinated in Israel were 27 times more likely to be admitted to the hospital. And that went all over social media. So here's something to think about when you're looking at these studies. First of all, this is an observational study. That literally means that this data is likely unable to be reproduced. If you really do a good study, if you do it in Israel, I should be able to reproduce it in Georgia. They should be able to reproduce it in Brazil. They should be able to reproduce it in the UK. The second thing is they looked at a group of people, all of whom had naturally been infected, and compared them to people who had gotten the vaccine, and concluded that those who had gotten the vaccine were actually sicker. But what they didn't tell you is that the group of people who had been naturally infected was a survivor group, because they didn't talk about all the people who had gotten infected who had died. They literally were only counting those who were left standing. So then when you compare the groups, you're not comparing apples to apples. These are not equitable cohorts. And then additionally, they only looked at the January and February groups. If you can recall, in January and February, older people were getting the vaccine, those with higher risk of disease, and also older people. These are also the same people in the vaccinated group who are more likely, as I explained earlier, to have these breakthrough infections. They also, in the unvaccinated group, were more likely to have died. So this was a nonsense study that was much touted in the news, and we have to understand what we're reading when we're looking at scientific information. I'm often asked, can't we reach herd immunity without taking vaccines? The answer is absolutely. We can just allow the virus to pass through society and see what happens. But here's the deal. In order to do that, we have to be able to tolerate a certain amount of death. Only the survivors go on to have immunity. The vaccines allow everybody to move forward with immunity and mitigate that death. We have science to help us reach herd immunity without having a plague decimate our land and us having to tolerate death. And then those who survive are the ones with immunity. We are a civilized society. We can do better than that.
Yeah. And I think that's a great point, Dr. Morgan, about us looking out for each other. It's really not just about us individually, but how we are interacting with other people and how our choices impact people. Just to share something personal, my father died from COVID in January, and he had a woman working in his office, and she came in and she felt a little sick, and she put some lotion on, and she was saying she couldn't smell it. And I can't trace it back, and I can't turn back time, but I suspect that that's where he caught it. And just so from a personal perspective, it's very important that we look out for each other. So thank you so much for driving that point home. I know, Dr. Oden, you probably want to add on something to that, but I also want to present you with a question that has been asked specifically to you. It's from Kim, and she said, as an FDA expert, is one vaccine better than the other?
Well, it seems like all of them are actually pretty good. I mean, they're all pretty amazing. They work pretty well. Some are dosed a bit different, right? So, it seems like Moderna has the highest efficacy rate with the Delta variant. Then you have the Pfizer that kind of is after that, and then Johnson & Johnson, although with the booster, Johnson & Johnson efficacy rate skyrockets up that quite a bit. So they're all pretty good. It's hard to kind of say which one's better than the other because they're all pretty amazing. They're doing exactly what they were intended to do. And so if you have access to either one of them, you need to take it. Of course, some people are actually afraid of needles. So in that setting, getting the Johnson & Johnson, that's just one shot. So for some people, are different hesitant, they can just do that. I know everyone's really afraid of the mRNA vaccine technology and this and that. Johnson & Johnson is not an mRNA vaccine. It's actually a vector vaccine. So, take that one if you have concerns about mRNA being too new for you to take. And so they're all pretty good. They're all better than not taking anything. And depending on where you live, you may only have access to one or the other. So, you can't go wrong by being vaccinated for either one of them.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Ty, I actually have a question for you, and it's from someone who submitted in the chat. We're seeing a lot with athletes in vaccinations and initial concerns about, is it going to affect my body? Am I going to still be able to run fast? So as a top performing athlete yourself, did you notice any change in your performance after being vaccinated?
Well, I think my jump shot has gotten a lot better.
Yeah.
No, but seriously, I haven't noticed any changes in my performance. I haven't had any issues or illnesses. I know the doctors were saying that some people after they are vaccinated, have issues with fatigue and some of those things, but I haven't had any issues. I got vaccinated in early April, and I've been great ever since.
Love it, love it. And Dr. Dodson, we wanted you to add on a little bit about the vaccine differences, specifically because I know that there are certain side effects like Moderna versus Pfizer, the enlarged heart one. There's certain people that should avoid certain vaccines. Can you speak a little bit about that, about which vaccine works for specific groups?
Well, that's up in the air. I don't have the exact preferred vaccine, either Moderna or Pfizer. But, as Dr. Odom stated earlier, all the vaccines work in the same manner. The only difference between them is that the Moderna and Pfizer are messenger RNA vaccines, which is sort of new to the vaccine world. And with J&J, it's more of a traditional type and adenovirus type of vaccine.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I can add to that as well. When it sounds like they were asking about myocarditis or something like that.
Yeah.
So we have these reports of myocarditis with the messenger RNA vaccines, Pfizer and Moderna, generally in males less than the age of 35. Myocarditis is an inflammation of the lining of your heart. And I'm going to minimize it. It is quite serious, but it's also 100% treatable if you seek care, 100% treatable. So that's one serious side effect of the messenger RNA vaccines, rare but serious. Also lymphadenopathy, mostly in women, and that means you get swelling of your lymph nodes on the same side of your body as your injection. And that generally goes away in 5 to 7 days, but it can be quite scary for a woman, especially if she has a history of breast cancer or a family history of breast cancer or at risk of breast cancer, or in the middle of a breast cancer workup, or getting a screening mammogram and the artifact is read incorrectly. So we need to be aware of what that is as well. And then, of course, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine had a pause April 13th through April 23rd because of these blood clots, the CVST, cerebral venous sinus thrombosis. The end result was they did find more of these blood clots. They were mostly in women. The only single one in man occurred during the clinical trials. Of the women who received the blood clots, they were all between the ages of 18 and 50. And the majority of them clustered between the ages of 34 and 40 for these blood clots. Very rare, 7 in 1 million. That's exceedingly rare. And to give you some context, birth control pills have a risk of blood clots of 1 in 1,000. To provide even more context, you're more likely to be admitted to the hospital with a pogo stick injury than you are to get a blood clot from the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. Yeah. So those are all the different risks for some of the more serious ones. I don't want to mitigate them because if you get this, it is serious and you must seek medical care. But each of these things is 100% treatable. And even during the Johnson & Johnson pause, not a single person died. But you must seek medical care.
Thank you. Thank you for giving us clarity on that. Dr. Stats, all of the stats. Thank you so much, Dr. Morgan. Now, we have a question from Dolly. She's watching from Texas. She says that she is fully vaccinated. She's a female, 61 years old. She has type 2 diabetes. Is she eligible for the booster? Because I know that there are only, specific groups that are being encouraged to get the booster. Any of our doctors on the panel, you could answer that question?
Yes, I can answer that question. Yes, she is eligible for the booster. She has diabetes as the underlying health condition. So I was certainly, I believe she stated that she she received the Pfizer vaccine. And at this time, we do have a full approval for the booster for Pfizer. So I would recommend her getting the booster vaccine.
Thank you. Thank you. I have a question for the influencers, AJ, Isaac, Ty. Some people are low key. I wouldn't say embarrassed, but I'm going to say that for lack of a better word. They don't want to look like people have been called sheep for getting the vaccine or being naive. With you all being influencers and having huge followers on social media, what is your response to that?
I'll jump in if nobody wants to jump in.
I'll take it. I mean, you shouldn't worry about that. You shouldn't worry about that. Honestly, what I've told people a lot of times is COVID is a disease or illness of social responsibility, right? You have to care about the people that may be affected that you don't know. You may get COVID and infect someone that infects someone that affects someone that dies. And so it's kind of just having the accountability to make sure that you're not unintentionally causing harm to another individual. So getting vaccinated, I think I wouldn't worry about being considered a sheep. And it's not like you got to tell everybody you got vaccinated. I mean, more often than not, I would find out people in my inner circle that caught COVID that didn't tell people they caught COVID because they felt embarrassed about catching COVID, feeling like they were ashamed of getting ill because they probably were outside and probably did get sick and struggle. So I think getting vaccinated is the least of your worries when it comes to protecting innocent people and your family and your friends. So I wouldn't worry about that.
AJ, did you want to chime in?
Well, I agree with everything that he just said. It's not about feeling like you're a sheep at all. It's really just being socially responsible, just like Isaac spoke about just now. I spoke to someone earlier today, and we asked and spoke about this earlier in the panel about getting like if I'm vaccinated or if I'm not vaccinated, how am I harming somebody else? And the doctor spoke about the mutations happening in unvaccinated people and being able to spread the virus that way. So you have to be socially responsible, and it's hard because the history that we have here in America when it comes to African Americans and medicine, and we have been the guinea pigs many, many times. But this isn't the case right now. The case is that this disease is out here. COVID-19 it's really affecting our community a lot worse than the other communities, and we're dying from it. People are dying from it. So we have to protect ourselves. And I know a lot of people also are hesitant because they say they don't know what's in the vaccine. I don't know what's in the vaccine. I'm not going to take it. And I say to them, well, what was in the chicken you ate last night? Or what was the cocktail you're drinking right now? Tell me the ingredients of the cocktail you're drinking. Or, what was it? We put a lot of stuff in our body that we do not know what's in it without questioning it. Why are we questioning this right now when we're in the middle of a pandemic? We have over 500,000 people in America that have died. And we have something that can actually save your life. I know somebody who was very healthy, very natural, anti-vaxxer, said that they felt that they would be immune to it, contracted COVID and passed within a week. And now his family doesn't have a father. His wife has to figure out how to support the family. You don't have a second chance to make this decision. So make an informed decision and understand that it really truly is a life and death decision.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Ty, did you want to add anything?
I mean, for me, it's bigger than me. You know, I wanted to make sure I was doing my part to keep my parents safe who are older. I'm around kids a lot to make sure, you know, that I'm doing my part to keep them safe as well. So it wasn't about anyone, you know, saying being a sheep or a follower. It's about doing my part to stay safe and keep my loved ones safe.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. We do have a question from Jay. He's asking for the doctors, how common is it to have long-term effects from catching COVID? So memory issues, brain fog, internal scarring, things of that nature.
Seems to be pretty high. I mean, I've seen reports of like everyone who's been affected with COVID-19, 10% of them have the long haul COVID symptoms. So again, once you clear the infection, you still have symptoms, you're still symptomatic in different ways. As psychiatrists, I'm often seeing people who didn't have any concentration issues before getting the infection, and now they're not able to study for different things. And there's a very wide age range. And so the issue with the virus is that it's very unpredictable. You don't know how your body is going to respond once you get it. Your immune system is not all about your diet or how good you work out or your plant-based diet. All those things are great. It definitely will help your immune system for sure, but it's still so unpredictable how your body responds to it. And so we're seeing these long-term symptoms, scarring to tissues. The inflammation is the biggest aspect of why you see people with severe disease who get COVID. The long haul brain fog issues, we're still trying to understand how long it lasts. So far, there's people who caught COVID last year who still have the brain fog, who still have psychiatric problems as a result. And so again, being vaccinated definitely mitigates that risk significantly. I also wanted to briefly talk about the natural immunity thing because I see people really not understand this pretty well. So you're unvaccinated, you get infected with COVID, your body's going to break down the virus and start to make antibodies for different parts of the virus because it wants to increase the probability that it can catch it. But what you really want to have antibodies for is the spike protein. The spike protein is the part outside the virus that attaches to cells that helps it enter the cells. And so the vaccines help your body make antibodies for the spike protein, whereas your body naturally encounters the virus, which many people die from that, as we've seen. It's making antibodies for different parts of the virus, trying to increase the probability. But if it's not making up the spike protein, it's still entering your body, it's still causing disease to occur. And so natural immunity is definitely a big gamble. And we have technology now available to help you with that.
I have a question.
Yes.
Can I have a question?
Yes, go ahead, Isaac.
Yeah, so I have friends of mine that swear by a lot of natural remedies. There's a lot of our community that feels they are immune to COVID because of natural remedies. Is there truth to that? Or are there things that, we can take? I hear elderberry and sea moss and a lot of different things that people say help them beat COVID. I have a friend of mine that actually took all that stuff and still got COVID and got really, really sick. So I don't, I need to know or want people to know, is there any way to really help from natural remedies to protect yourself against COVID? Because I've seen my friends get sick with it.
I'm going to start with that. I'll let Dr. Dodson follow me. He does all the natural remedies. So I do something called the Stairwell Chronicles, where I literally sit on the steps and I answer a single COVID vaccine question or a question about COVID in 60 seconds or less. And I post it on social media. It's on Instagram, it's on Twitter, it's on TikTok. It's called the Stairwell Chronicles. I've probably done 60 or 70 of them. I did one recently on home remedies. And here is what I'm going to say, and I think somebody already noted that I'm very data driven. Is there data to support it? I don't necessarily say it's not true. I'm only saying we have no data to show that it's true. And the things that I talked about in my Stairwell Chronicle were things like hydrogen peroxide, inhaled bleach, rum, vodka, oregano, vitamin C, on and on and on. And so the question is, what do we have data on that substantiates and can support you moving forward with these types of home remedies versus what don't we have data on? I'm not saying it's not true. I'm saying we can't prove that it's true.
And as I stated earlier in my introduction, so I deal with this quite often over the FDA, where we are evaluating dietary supplements, turmeric, and high doses of vitamin C that are said to treat, prevent, or mitigate COVID. And so those things are unfactual, right? As Dr. Morgan said, one of the things I say to persons when we talk about COVID and the hesitancy is that I rely on data, science, facts, and statistics. So you can't dispute those things. And so going back to what Dr. Morgan said is that there is no scientific data to support any of this stuff. So again, I'm not saying I'm piggybacking on Dr. Morgan. I'm not saying that, there's no benefit to loading up on your vitamin C, your zinc, your elderberry, whatever dietary ingredient or supplement that you choose. But there's just not any scientific data to support that. And that's one of the key things that on the COVID task force at the FDA, we deal with these firms every day. And it's always the same ones repeating these claims that these supplements can prevent, treat, or mitigate COVID-19, and that is not factual.
Thank you for clearing that up. We do have a question from Tohun. It says, is it safe to take an annual flu shot with your COVID vaccine?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Next question. Yes, please do.
So, Dr. Oden, I know we were talking about earlier. I just had a question about, just having a conversation with someone who's adamant against not getting the vaccine hesitancy. I think it's that, and just, the tiredness of this pandemic. I mean, we're going into almost year 3 of COVID, and people are tired of talking about it. They're tired they just want to act like it does not exist. And some people don't want to have the conversation. So, I know there's people that are watching that, want to be able to speak to their loved ones about getting vaccinated. Is there a way what suggestions would you give to somebody that just wants to have an open conversation and possibly help somebody or save them, like getting them?
So I'll give a perspective from the doctor. So we're beginning to see something that we're calling compassion fatigue syndrome. And our physicians, as I opened my statement to say, this is our 4th surge. A year and a half into it, we are exhausted. Talk about being exhausted. Talk about being tired and beaten down and downtrodden and feeling defeated, that you are doing everything you can within the hospital, which has a high standard of upholding science. If there's any organization that is a monolith to science, it's our hospitals, right? This is the practical application of scientific discovery. And yet we walk right outside of the hospital and you see people without masks, they're gathering, they're eating in restaurants, and you have spent the entire day risking your life to treat the unvaccinated who are coming to the hospital, who had a choice and they chose to not be vaccinated. And the risk of compassion fatigue syndrome on the mental and emotional health of people who are caring for you is it begins to erode empathy. Imagine you are now seeking help for something that could kill you, and your doctor lacks empathy, is just exhausted. So don't forget, your doctors, your nurses, your physician assistants, your nurse practitioners are all human too. All of the mental effects that everyone else is experiencing, we experience them as well, and maybe even more so, because we have to face the truth every day and then leave the hospital and face that dichotomy of the outside world, many people not living that truth.
Also, one of the questions I ask, I'll ask patients all the time, are you vaccinated? They may say no. And then my next question would be, is there anything I can explain to you? Is there any information I can share with you that can give you a different perspective based on what you've already read? Because I'm sure you've read things, you've done the best that you can do as far as making an informed decision. But is there anything I can send you that may give you a different perspective? Because ultimately, people are trying to do the best that they believe they can to keep themselves safe. They believe the vaccines are harmful, but ultimately, my biggest thing has been informed decisions. You have to make sure you're making an informed choice. Making an informed choice means you need to understand the benefits of your decision, the risk of your decision. And I think a lot of people are only looking at it from only 25% of the information, or maybe 50% of the information. They don't have the full story about how dangerous the virus is, or how much this is spreading, and how the variants are taking place, and how your body can react to it in all types of ways, how safe the vaccines are. And so I would say to anyone who's talking to a loved one and you're getting frustrated, just ask them, is there anything I can share with you that you're open to receiving that could potentially help you see this in a different way? And then to see what they respond to from there.
Thank you. Dr. Dodson, did you want to add anything to that?
I missed the initial question. There was so much conversation going on. Sorry.
It was just, how do you have the conversation with the loved one who's being hesitant about taking the vaccine?
That's an excellent question, AJ, because I actually dealt with that within my own personal family, where there was hesitancy regarding the vaccine. So one of the things that I did with my family members is that I sat down and just talked about the science behind it. I talked about the benefits of the vaccine. And then I just shared the statistics, about the, lives that have been lost daily from the virus itself. And we also had a close family member to succumb to COVID-19. So I think for me, it was just me having to sit down and just going over some facts and data regarding COVID-19 and the benefits of being vaccinated. And that didn't, and one of the things that people are saying that, even my family members were saying that, well, it's not 100%. Well, nothing is 100%, right? But again, as I explained, that it does provide that layer of protection, and it prevents you from being hospitalized. So those have been my discussions with family members and friends, and just, trying to help them to understand the science behind it. And as someone mentioned earlier, people argue that the vaccines were manufactured too fast. And I think that were you, AJ. And I asked the same questions. Well, do you know what's in this that you're taking? The penicillin that you're taking? Do you know what's in this that you have been taking? And so I propose the same questions back to them when they have these hesitancies and theories regarding COVID-19 and the vaccines. So I think it's just having a healthy discussion with your family members and just building that trust.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Dodson. We have Tiffany joining us here again today, and I want to encourage everyone to follow at ATL Equity on all social media. We have all of our panelists tagged there as well, so that you can stay connected with them on social media, especially if you didn't have a question, if you did have a question that you wanted to ask this evening. And I know Tiffany from the mayor's office is going to be popping in here right about now. Hi, Tiffany. Oh. And so while we're getting her, okay, there she is. Okay.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to thank you so much for all of the wisdom you've shared with the community tonight. This is important, and I hope and pray that our community keeps this conversation going, that we open ourselves to continue to be curious, continue to question, but also continue to seek quality information. Thank you so much for your dedication to making sure that we build awareness around this very important issue. And I'm just sending all the love and vibes. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. And with that said, we are going to wrap up this Powering Through the Pandemic roundtable discussion. Again, thank you to all of our panelists. Be sure to stay connected with us on social media at ATL Equity, and you all have a wonderful evening.
Bye. Thanks, Maria. Bye, everybody.
Bye. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.